Welcome to another BAR walkthrough video from SuperfastCPA. I'm Logan, and in today's video, we're going to be going over BAR Area 2. This is Section J, Remembering and Understanding. Recall the financial statement, note disclosure requirements for reportable segments. And we're going to be doing that the SuperfastCPA way, which is diving straight into the questions to learn the material. Now, if you don't know much about our strategies, make sure you go to SuperfastCPA.com and sign up for our free 1-hour webinar training. In that 1 hour, we will teach you the key ingredients to passing the CPA exam so you don't waste months or even years of your time failing exams. And after you watch that, you're going to want to learn more, so make sure you also check out becoming a Superfast CPA Pro member. Pro members get access to a lot of great stuff, including the Pro course where Nate in detail explains exactly what you're supposed to be doing every day to pass the exams. It's basically a much more in-depth version of the 1-hour webinar. And Pro members also get access to the member versions of these MCQ walkthrough videos. And usually those are double the amount of questions as the YouTube videos. Now, just like the previous video, this one will also only be 5 questions for YouTube and for members because, again, it's a pretty small topic and I just didn't feel like it warranted 10 questions for the members so that they could get extra practice. So if you're watching this on YouTube or if you watched the previous video on YouTube, just be glad that you're getting the same information as the members. But again, Superfast CPA Pro members typically get access to the full versions of these videos so that they can get a little bit more help and a little bit more understanding. So just that this video is basically kind of a continuation of the previous video and they're both pretty small topics. So with all that said, let's dive straight into the questions for this video. All right, here we are at question 1, and let's just dive straight into this one. Under US GAAP segment reporting requirements, which of the following must be disclosed for each reportable segment if the information is provided to the Chief Operating Decision Maker, or the CODM? Now, again, this is kind of a continuation of the previous video where we talked about reportable segments. In this, we're talking about some of the requirements when those reportable segments are actually reported, like what has to be reported with those segments. So let's go through this. Option A, profit or loss and total liabilities. Option B, profit or loss and total assets. Option C, total revenues and cash flows from operations. Or option D, intersegment revenues and total equity. So again, which one of these is required to be disclosed for reportable segments, which we learned about in the previous video? If you have any idea, that's great. If not, that's okay. We're using these questions to learn, so let's dive into the explanation. All right, here we are. The answer is B, profit or loss and total assets. So those are both things that are required. Now let's go down to the explanation. ASC 280, which by the way, you probably don't really need to know that specifically, but sometimes I like to throw that into these videos just to make sure you know where this is coming from. ASC 280 requires disclosure of segment profit or loss and total assets for each reportable segment if the information is regularly provided to the CODM. Segment liabilities are encouraged, but not required. So option A is incorrect. They probably will report the liabilities, but they don't have to. Cash flows are not disclosed by segment, eliminating option C. And intersegment revenues are disclosed separately, but total equity is not a required segment disclosure, so option D is incorrect. So again, we learned here that when it comes to the reportable segments, which again, we went over in the previous video, what some of the things that have to be reported with them is their profit or loss and their total assets. Now with that, let's go to the next question. All right, here we are at question 2. Now in this question, I'm going to be able to point out something that I like to point out whenever it's an option. And a good strategy is to read the last sentence of a question first. Very frequently, that last sentence will give you context for what the rest of the question is about so that you know what you're looking for when you read through it. And this is a great strategy for test day because you have no idea what you're going to be seeing in the questions. So read the last sentence first, and very frequently, it will give you a quick head start, a quick heads up with, okay, I'm dealing with this in this question. So again, that's why you do it. Let's do that here. Which disclosure is required under US GAAP? Okay, let's go up to the top. Northwind Corporation has total consolidated revenues of $5 million. Segment A reports $800,000 of sales to customer X, Segment B reports $300,000 of sales to customer Y, and Segment C reports $200,000 of sales to customer Z. So this might feel kind of weird, like what is this talking about? Let's go through the options to kind of see if you can get what it's saying. A, disclose only customer X since revenues from that customer exceed 10% of consolidated revenues. Option B, disclose customers X and Y since together they exceed 10% of consolidated revenues. Option C, disclose all three since they all together exceed 10% of consolidated revenues. Or option D, no disclosure is required because disclosures relate only to segments, not individual customers. So based on what we're seeing here, basically it's saying that these segments had a certain amount of sales to specific customers. Is that something that has to be reported? And what's the threshold or calculation for it if that does have to be reported? So if you want, maybe pause the video and think about this, but if you have no idea, that's okay. We're going to look at the answer together. Okay, here we are. The answer is A, disclose only customer X since revenues from that customer exceed 10% of consolidated revenues. So let's go through this so that you can understand this new rule. ASC 280, again, you don't necessarily need to know that, but I like to throw it in there, requires disclosure of the fact that revenues from a single external customer equal to 10% or more of consolidated revenues, along with the total revenues from that customer and the segments involved. The 10% threshold is applied to each customer individually, not in the aggregate. In this case, only customer X exceeds 10% of $5 million, which is $500,000. Customers Y and Z individually fall below that threshold. So again, what it's saying here is if there is a specific customer that a segment got a lot of sales from, and that customer makes up for 10% or more of the total revenues from customers, from external customers, then that needs to be noted in the disclosures. You don't have to necessarily say who the customer was, but you have to say this happened. You have to say how much it was, and basically just telling the circumstances for that. You have to disclose that whenever a customer makes up for 10% or more of the external sales. So with that, we learned a little bit more. Now let's go to the next question. All right, here we are at question 3. When reporting segment profit or loss under US GAAP, how is the operating profit of each reportable segment determined? Okay, let's go through the options. Option A, it must be calculated using US GAAP operating income, even if the CODM uses a different measure. And remember, we talked about that a little bit in one of the previous questions. Option B, it must exclude all non-cash expenses, such as depreciation and amortization. Option C, it is determined by applying IFRS segment reporting rules since they are more restrictive. Or option D, it is based on the measure of profit or loss reviewed by the chief operating decision maker, or again, the CODM. So again, when you are reporting segment profit or loss, which is required, we learned that in question 1, how is the operating profit of each reportable segment determined? How do they determine what needs to be reported? So think about this if you want, but again, this one might be one where you don't really have any clue, so it's okay. Let's go ahead and go to the answer if you don't know. All right, here we are at the answer. D, it is based on the measure of profit or loss reviewed by the chief operating decision maker, or again, the CODM. Segment profit or loss must be reported using the same measure of performance that management, or in other words, the CODM, uses internally to allocate resources and evaluate performance. This measure does not need to match GAAP operating income and may include or exclude certain items depending on internal reporting practices. The goal is to present segment results as management views them, not to force conformity to GAAP at the segment level. So specifically, when we're talking about the segment level, the way that you determine the operating profit of the reporting segment profit or loss is with whatever measure the chief operating decision maker uses. So that was just another thing that you need to know for reporting segment requirements. Now let's go to the next question. All right, here we are at question 4. Which of the following entity-wide disclosures is required under US GAAP, even if an entity has only one reportable segment? Okay, let's go through the options. Option A, profit or loss from each line of business calculated under GAAP. Option B, total liabilities for each geographic area. Option C, revenues from external customers by product or service. Option D, cash flows from operating activities by reportable segment. So again, which one of them as an entity-wide disclosure is required, even if they only have one reportable segment? So think about this. Again, you probably don't know because this is a very straightforward video, just a lot of small topics. But if you want to think about it, that's fine. Come back when you're ready. All right, here we are. The answer is C, revenues from external customers by product or service. So let's go through this. Certain entity-wide disclosures are required regardless of the number of reportable segments. So even if you have 10 reportable segments or only one, you have to have certain entity-wide disclosures. These include revenues from external customers for each product or service, or a group of similar products, revenues attributed to the company's country of domicile and foreign countries, and long-lived assets by geography. Segment liabilities and cash flows are not required disclosures. Segment profit or loss is disclosed only if the entity has multiple reportable segments. Segment profit or loss is disclosed only if the entity has multiple reportable segments, because if you think about it, if they only have one segment, that basically means it's the whole company. So the profit or loss of the company matches the segment profit or loss. That's why it's not really necessary to disclose segment profit or loss when you don't have multiple segments. Now with that, we learned a little bit more. Let's go to the next question. All right, here we are at question 5. Which of the following situations would require disclosure about major customers under US GAAP segment reporting rules? Now, we did learn about this in a previous question, maybe in a little bit of a different format, but you have learned about this. So let's go through this and you probably can figure out the answer. Option A, 3 customers each account for 5% of consolidated revenues. Option B, a single customer accounts for 12% of consolidated revenues. 2 customers together account for 15% of consolidated revenues, but individually they are 8% and 7%. Or option D, a single customer accounts for 9% of consolidated revenues. Now again, we've been over this. You probably know the answer. Think about this, pause the video if you need to, and come back when you're ready. All right, here we are at the answer. B, a single customer accounts for 12% of consolidated revenues. Now, again, this is a pretty straightforward answer when you already know how to do this. US GAAP or ASC 280, again, you don't have to know ASC 280 probably, but it's there if you want to try to remember it, requires disclosure when revenues from a single external customer equal or exceed 10% of consolidated revenues. The disclosure must include the fact of reliance on a major customer, the total revenues from that customer, and the segment or segments involved. The threshold is applied to each customer individually, not in the aggregate. Therefore, only option B meets the requirement. And again, you don't have to specifically say which customer, you just have to disclose that there is a reliance on a major customer, the total revenues from that customer, and which segments were involved. But again, you don't have to say specifically it was this customer or whatever. You might be able to, but you don't have to. Now with that, we've learned about the different disclosure requirements for reportable segments. Now, before we do anything else, let's do one more part of the SuperfastCPA CPA process called pillar topics. Now, the idea behind pillar topics is as you're going through the questions to learn the material in your review course, you will notice the things that keep popping up. You've seen 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 questions trying to teach you about this specific rule that we just went over, the single customer accounting for 10% or more of consolidated revenues. You're going to be seeing questions, and whatever you see the most in the questions, is an obviously important topic. So you take the time to write this out as a pillar topic in your own words, so that as you prepare and as you get to test day, you are building your own personal repository of the most important things you need to know, the pillar topics, for the exam so that you are ready for the exam. So let's go ahead and take a look at the pillar topics for this video. All right, here we are at the pillar topics. Again, this is basically just a summary, the key points pulled out from the questions. For each reportable segment, companies must disclose profit or loss and total assets if those amounts are provided to the Chief Operating Decision Maker or CODM. If a single customer provides 10% or more of consolidated revenues, the company must disclose that fact, the total revenues from that customer, and the segments that were involved. Segment profit or loss is reported based on the measure used by the CODM, which may differ from GAAP operating income. And then finally, entity-wide disclosures include revenues from product or service and revenues and long-lived assets by geographic area, even if there's only one reportable segment. So again, there are certain entity-wide disclosures that have to be disclosed even if there's only one segment, or basically it's just the company. So those are the things that have to be reported, and everything else that we talked about in the pillar topics, again, is some of the reporting requirements. Now with that, we've gone over everything for this video. Now remember, usually the YouTube version is 5 questions and the member version for pro members is 10 questions. This is one of the few cases where the pro members are also going to get the same 5 questions because it's a pretty small, pretty straightforward topic that I wanted to go over. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you just got the same information that pro members get, but usually pro members get access to the full 10 question version so that they can get a little bit more help and a little bit more understanding and more practice. So if you like this and you like our other videos, make sure you check out becoming a SuperfastCPA Pro member because again, they get access to a lot of great stuff, including the full videos and the pro course. And if you want to learn more about becoming a pro member, make sure you check out our SuperfastCPA training webinar on SuperfastCPA.com. We will teach you the key ingredients to passing the CPA exam in just 1 hour. And after that, again, it will give you a great path to learning about and becoming a SuperfastCPA Pro member. So check out the webinar, check out becoming a pro member. If you liked the video, make sure to like it and leave a comment. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next video.